Hello, I'm Greene, and this is Chthonica, episode 6. Chthonica, the podcast about horror in all its fictional forms. And today, what a treat. We've got two really special guests here. I've got master editor and anthologist Ellen Datlow and horror great John Langan here to talk about a new project which has just been released. But first, you know Ellen Datlow. You know her from books such as Nightmares and Body Shocks, the book cover I will not turn out to face the public because I do work calls from here. And also, of course, the famous Best Horror of the Year series. Heading into which volume is coming out this year? Is it 14?
14's this year, and I'm working on 15.
Wow. So we've got yes, many great books edited and anthologized by Ellen Datlow. Ellen, how are you today?
I'm great.
Good.
Great.
Jet lag back from a big vacation, as I understand. And of course, we've got John Langan. You guys know him from books like Children of the Fang and The Wide Carnivorous Sky, Saphira, right? Saphira?
Yes, right. Very good.
And perhaps best known for his novel The Fisherman, which I just keep seeing it being brought up in comments on Reddit and Twitter, and it's just become this modern classic of cosmic horror, and is such a fantastic book. And I'm really excited about your contribution to this new volume because I think people who dug The Fisherman are going to dig your contribution here. But this is what we're here to talk about today, which is the Screams from the Dark Anthology of Monster Stories that Ellen has brought to us. 29 all new stories, and these are hard hitters. Who do you have in this book, Ellen? Who do you have contributing?
Cassandra Corr, Laird Barron, Stephen Graham Jones, Joyce Carol Oates, Carol Johnstone, Karen Warren, Gary Kilworth.
Yep.
I can't remember.
Brian Evanson's in here.
Brian Evanson. I can't.
Gemma Files. Gemma Files has a bizarre and creepy story that I really enjoy.
Yeah, and Daryl Gregory, who I've never published before.
Okay.
And Joe Lansdale.
Yep. And I'm kind of curious, who else? Anyone else that you've not had not worked before?
Yeah.
With before?
Chickadilly, whose last name I have a hard time pronouncing.
Yeah.
She's from she's British and Nigerian, I believe.
Yes. Yeah.
And oh God, what's his name? Indra Das. I mean, his
Indra Pramit.
Yeah, he usually is called
Indra
by
Das.
Indra. Yeah, so I was really happy to get them. And Priya Sharma is in it.
Mm-hmm.
I could just look at the table of content. Like, I don't know. The thing is, the longer a book, the harder it is to remember everything and to organize it. So sometimes, and also, working on too many books at one time, I sometimes get mixed up. Like I was thinking a certain person was in it, and I realized, I don't think they're in this one.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, it's a heavy hitter, or a big list of heavy hitters for sure.
I'll think of others as we go.
Olivia Llewellyn has a new story in this, Now Voyager, which is really terrific. Nathan Ballingrud has another one of his Hobbs Landing stories is in here, and that's really cool. Three Mothers Mountain, and of course John Langan is in here. We'll talk about his story in just a minute. In terms of the range of stories, it really is quite a range that you have here. I mean, some of the stories I think about Jeffrey Ford's story is kind of a send up of the community overcoming their differences to save itself from, the monstrous spawn of a corporate conspiracy. Pretty funny send up kind of a story.
I love it. Yeah. And he uses, and Lynn, his wife, is a hero.
Yes.
In many of his stories.
Yes. She kind of has to pull Jeffrey's fat out of the fire once or twice in the story. So she's a pretty tough lady here. But then contrast that with like stories by Joyce Carol Oates and Caitlin Kiernan, and which are pretty dark. You've got quite a range here where you're really looking to get something that reached across such a range of tones.
Yes, but you never know what you're going to get. I mean, yes, and I'm really pleased by the variety. But as I said, you never really know what's going to happen when you solicit stories from people on a theme. And I feel really lucky that I got such a wide range of tones and places and, plots and everything and themes.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it
And,
was
and also some are quite short, and some are really pretty full-bodied stories. Almost got a novella there toward the end, I think. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But in terms of just like the range of monsters, you kind of have the full panoply of monsters. Werewolves and vampires, witches and ghosts. You got elder gods, a very limber skeleton, a metamorphic elf, a real-life 19th century physician, corporate evil, a malevolent pig spirit, or possibly just some guy's drunk uncle, Bigfoot, sea creatures, and then fear itself. Did anyone's approach to their monster surprise you, Ellen?
Well, yes and no. Actually, I was actually worried about Joyce Carol Oates' story.
Yeah.
Not because of her, well, we talked about it. I mean, she was worried. She didn't want it to be taken the wrong way. Because it is about a monstrous real life physician who basically did horrible things to women, especially slaves.
Yeah.
And she wanted it to be honorable, honored these people, the victims. And I think it's gotten some very good attention. So I think she succeeded, but she's always ready to take a chance.
Yes.
So, it's not that it surprised me, but, it was, she usually doesn't, well, she does. I was going to say she doesn't usually take real life events, but she certainly does.
Yeah.
Her novel Blonde and Zombie and just a whole bunch of things have been based on reality. Let's see. Well, John's was within his wheelhouse in a good way.
Yes.
And I like that. And Stephen Graham Jones was like, he threw every monster in there in the book, in the story, and that was kind of fun. It's horror, but it's also fun.
Yes.
So it's hard to say. Did they surprise me? Yes and no.
Yeah.
I knew that they would produce really great stories. The fact that they produced very different stories from each other was interesting. I didn't know where Joe Lansdale's story was going to go. I didn't know where Daryl's story was going to go.
Yeah.
So that's always a surprise.
Obviously, it's one of my most eagerly anticipated reads.
I'm curious to know what you think of it.
Oh yeah, no, and look, it's just a fanboy for a moment. I vividly remember reading The Dark, Ellen's ghost story anthology. What was that, like 2003, I think?
Wow.
And there are people like Glenn Hirschberg in there, and that was when Glenn had really just sort of exploded, with Two Sams and The Snowman's Children. And so to be in a book with him now is just that's sort of astonishing to me.
Oh, and that's actually a story that is very unlike Glenn, because it takes place in Tasmania. Was it you or someone else who asked, you, Greg, or someone else on Twitter asked if he was Tasmanian? Because
someone else did, yeah.
Because he really captures that culture.
Yeah.
I think it was Neil McRobert, I think, was the one who asked.
So no, he is not Tasmanian, he's Californian. I'm not sure that's where he's from, but he does a really good job.
Wow. Capturing
Tasmania. And Karen Warren she's Australian, and her story is really haunting. She does really good horror. I love her horror. So, and this is one that really worked for me.
And Norman Partridge has a story in there called The Island, about an island, but the island is kind of a monster in a way. He's also a big name who I don't know that he publishes a lot now.
He doesn't. I was really glad to get a story from him.
Yeah.
He doesn't, but I asked him and he wrote it.
Nice. That's awesome.
And
it's a terrific
the interesting
story.
thing, of course, is Gary Kilworth writes about an island too.
Yeah.
And initially his story seems kind of like, to me, until the end, until the last, 5 pages or so, it seems like it's a send up of these assholes, these tourists who are just jerks, and they kind of are, but they're not, and horrible things happen. Really horrible things.
Yes.
And it was an interesting contrast to the other story about an island.
In terms of a growing body of kind of international and multicultural authors, did anyone introduce maybe a new monster that you had never heard of or seen before?
Sure. Chickadilly,
Mhm.
hers, and well, the thing is, well, they're all different. I mean, Priya's I mean, she's very British, but she is, and she doesn't write much about India or where her ancestors are from. And the story is very British. It isn't that culture, the ancestral culture at all, but it's very weird. I mean, the story was a strange story taken from like British history almost.
Mhm.
I would have liked, I mean, most of the stories are by Americans or Brits,
Mhm.
and I would have liked to have gotten more international. It's hard sometimes, I don't know enough international writers to ask them for stories.
Yeah.
Usually for horror. I mean, there
Yeah.
are a lot more international writers writing science fiction and fantasy, but not as many am I familiar with that write horror.
Mhm.
I probably would have liked to do get more international stories.
Is translation something that you would do? I mean,
Oh, no, it's like, no,
It-
I mean, the thing with translation, it's a monster. I mean, itself. I mean, I bought a few translations for Omni magazine years ago, and I got a Russian translator sent me like 4 synopses of stories.
Yeah.
And I picked one that seemed doable, and she translated, and I hated it.
Oh, wow.
But I bought it, I mean, I had committed to it. But then I had a Japanese translator. I mean, the person was not Japanese, an American translator who's translating Japanese into English. And they sent me the 2 stories that I bought by 2 different Japanese writers, because the thing is, I'll never commission a translation. You just don't know what you're going to get. You have to get it translated already. So if someone wants to send me, if I had solicited, I don't read other languages. So it's not kind of viable.
Right.
I mean, I might try to I would love to get a story from Thomas. I can never remember his whole name.
Who did?
Huvelt. I mean, he's Dutch. Older. I am always.
Is it Hoyvelt or?
Yeah, but there's a middle part.
Thomas Olde Hoyvelt, or
Yeah.
something like
Yes,
that.
yes, and I always miss. I'd love to get I love his. Well, I only read one novel. I haven't read Echo yet, but his first novel that I read was fabulous, and he writes in English, or he translates. Well, he asked me to help him find a translator for one of his books, for one of his novels, and he asked me which I thought would better in the translation. So I mean, he writes his books in Dutch, but he translates them, but he needs someone to smooth it out.
Right.
I would love to get a story from him, but it would be translated already into English. I mean, I'm not gonna. The thing is, who do you pay?
Yes.
That's one of the issues. I mean, when I bought those stories for Omni, we paid the translator. We didn't pay the author. I presume and hope that the translators paid the authors, but that was not within my purview.
Yeah.
I want to say something about John's story.
Well, I was going to say, let's talk about John's story.
And it has to do with translation, okay?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you got me here.
The title, I love the original title.
Yeah.
I forget what
it was. Bloedzuiger.
Yeah.
Okay.
However, he discovered, unfortunately, from someone who read the story, that the people are Norwegian, right?
They're Danish.
Danish. So someone read the story and said, that is not the word for what you're using. That is the wrong word. Wow. That is Dutch.
Yeah.
And so we had to change it to a title that I don't like as much.
No, I have to be honest. I don't really either. And I really
can't you change all the people to Dutch instead of Danish?
Well, I really thought about, like, if I had figured this out earlier, 6 months earlier, then I would have, and because the Dutch thing I could have made that work with the history of the Hudson Valley and Dutch settlement, and that sort of stuff. It's just
a silly thing, and no one else would know the difference. But because we both knew two titles, we know.
And to be honest with you, I really thought about just leaving it and not telling anybody, but
Someone
I knew
would
that
really
someone,
hate it. Someone
right,
would come out and say, "What are
somebody
you
would be like,
doing?"
how dare you? That was Dutch, that, and I would have been like, oh, you got me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
was that before it went to copy edit? I wonder if the copy editor would have noticed, would have caught it.
I think it was before copy edit. But
I
I'm
mean,
not
it's
100%
possible.
sure.
It's possible if we have. I don't remember who. I don't know who copy edited it, but it's a small possibility it might have caught it.
Yeah, I saw the original title in the arc that you sent
Yeah, and
me.
the original title, just like it's got that like this sort of zip to it, you know,
Yeah.
whereas the new one just sounds like a diabetes medication. Yeah.
So how would you pronounce the original title you had and then the revised title?
Well, the original title was something like Bloedzuiger.
Yeah.
But it looks like Bloodsweeger, you know, or Bloedzuiger, you know.
Yeah.
The new one is more like Blodsuger or something like that.
Yeah.
But it looks like blood sugar.
Yes.
So, you know, and I am diabetic, so maybe that was like some kind of subliminal thing, but
yeah. Very good. Well, what do you want to tell people about your story? What should they know about it that you're willing to give away here on the podcast?
I'm a little nervous because I have to admit that I did not start writing it for Ellen. I know she's going to be like, how dare you? What happened was I was contacted. There was an editor who was putting together a collection of stories, horror stories about New York State. And a lot of my stuff is, you know, set in and around the Hudson Valley. So I was like, oh, okay, cool. And at the same time, I had this, I don't know where it came from. It was a dream or just like one of those sort of images that comes to you of, like a sort of frozen circulatory system, like a sort of a winter landscape with this frozen circulatory system, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. And my wife and son were like, that would never happen. So I mean, to a certain extent, the story that was like, oh, I'm going to write a story about New York State, which deals with like which sort of gets to that image or figures out that image, and a lot of it, I was using autobiography. The party that the characters attend is not even too loosely based on a party that my son and I have gone to for a number of years. And the people who host the party are mingled Scandinavian ancestry. So I think that suggested the Danish part of things. And I came to a moment writing the story where I thought, oh my God, you've written another fishing story. And I don't fish. I should, like, my son is this great fly fisherman. I do not fish, but it's just, obviously I've got the novel, The Fisherman, and I have a few other stories where fishing has just popped up. And I was like, oh my God, here it goes again. And oh, look, and now you've got a story within the story, and which I do all the time, but you know, it's set in the past. And I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? And I talked to Laird Barron about this. And Laird said, lean into it. He said, don't run away from it. He said, if this is what you're like, if this is a kind of thing, like a kind of story you write, then lean into that and just go whole hog with it. And that helped. That actually helped to just say, okay, don't run away from what you do, but okay, yeah, you're right. That's another thing, that fishing is some kind of metaphor that really works for me. Go ahead and do that. And yeah, it became, it's funny, the reason I mentioned Glenn earlier, Glenn Hirschberg, was with the ending of this story. I was really thinking about the way that Glenn often ends his stories. You know, he often has these really brilliant, beautiful lyrical endings. And I was like, damn it, I'm going to do a Hirschberg ending. I'm not just going to do one of these endings where, you know, it like sort of stops on a dime, as it were. I want something that's like, you know, and when Glenn is doing that, I always think he's looking back in the direction of Bradbury at his best. And I thought that's what I'm going for here. So it's not supposed to be you know, and then the hand rose from the grave. You know, it's not supposed to be that. It is supposed to be sort of elegiac and expansive, and not necessarily scary in the immediate sense of things.
So wait a minute. So what happened to the anthology it was supposed to be for?
I missed the deadline. Surprise.
Can you tell me what it was? What anthology?
It was Jim Chambers' New York State of Fright anthology.
I thought that was only people who were members of
HWA. Yeah, somehow I got an invitation.
In New York
That chapter.
Chapter, which I'm a member of. Yeah. Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah. So, well, that was, I mean, and maybe that was why, because after a certain point, like I wrote to Jim and I was like, hey, buddy, how are things going? And like, there was nothing. And then the anthology was out like a month later. So maybe they were just, that's not fair.
But does he know? Does he know that that story was?
No, he will after this podcast. Someone will tell him. And he'll be like,
sorry, I didn't know.
Yes,
it's all John's fault.
It is. I do not argue that.
And it's very long. It is a novella.
It is. Yeah, it is. It is. I was going to say that it is actually a novella.
It's a novella.
And boy, is it a novella.
Would you consider it a period piece? Because, like, as you've mentioned, there's the lead character, the protagonist. So, the setting is you and your son David go to a party, and it's all, everyone's there at this location fishing. And while you're sitting there in the main area, you strike up a conversation with a woman named Doris. And then she goes into a story about her childhood and her growing up with her grandparents. And so it's set in such a distinct time period and such a distinct place. She's out in the countryside. She's really kind of isolated from the like urban centers and modern, the modernity of the cities. Do you think of it as a period piece? And I'm assuming it's kind of set in the 1950s, maybe the 40s.
Actually, it's late 60s.
Okay.
It's because her father has been killed in Vietnam.
Right.
Part of it was I had actually met a woman at one of these parties who didn't tell me any kind of story, but like she was my kind of model for the appearance of Doris. And then when I thought about that, I thought, well, this woman looks like she's this age, and if she's this age, then if this had happened to her when she was a child, it would, so to a certain extent, it was just the kind of narrative logic that was like, oh, okay, this must be the 60s then.
Yeah.
And the Revolutionary War, I mean, that's something that kind of looms, particularly for Kingston, or Wiltwyck, as it is in the story. It's something that looms large, that the British did actually burn the place down because they were sailing north to join what they thought were going to be the victorious British troops coming down from Saratoga. That didn't work out, and they just got mad. So they just kind of like unleashed on Kingston just because they were pissed. And it was just a kind of an act of terror, I guess you would say. And so the chance to incorporate that though into a story was like too much to resist, but there's a lot of I mean, this is, in terms of European settlement, this is one of the oldest areas of the country, obviously, the Northeast. And I think even in terms of the native peoples who've been here, have been here, I think since before the end of the last ice age, but there's north of me in Saugerties, it might even be a little north of Saugerties on the river, there's an old flint mine. And they think that this flint mine was used, 11, 12,000 years ago.
Wow.
So either the ice sheets are just retreating, or they might even still be there. So, that history that you can find, you can find so much there, or insert so much there, however you want to put that.
Yeah. So, and I think the laying down of these historical details of the Revolutionary War, for example, and then the details about like some strange encounters that the local populace have that are all kind of relayed. I think it's Doris's maybe grandmother worked in the public library.
The Woodstock Public Library. Yeah.
Yes, that's it. And so and that's in the story. That's the source of a number of these details, but it kind of weaves it together so much that I don't know where the facts end and the fiction begins. And I think that's part of the fun of this story, is that for all I know, there were strange encounters going on, and they got detailed and documented from his local folklore. Ellen? No, that was the made up part.
Ellen was like, I don't believe that. You think that you're telling me the British sailed up the river in ships? Come on.
Yeah.
Come on. You're telling me they burned Kingston to the ground? Come on.
That whole Revolutionary War was
that never
it was
happened.
A disagreement in a bar.
It didn't happen.
That's like the moon. It doesn't exist. I kind of feel like as I get older, I'm going back, or I don't know how to put it. You sort of look in the mirror sometimes, right? And you're like, man, I really do look like my dad, don't I? my mom or whatever. And for me, some of that is it's looking in the mirror and being like, oh, there's Stephen King and there's Peter Straub and there's Faulkner and there's Hawthorne and like that. That is kind of who I am, I guess, in some ways. And all of those guys are interested in place and placeness and the deep identity of place. And so I guess I just think of myself as I still want to do, and I still try to do new and different things in stories, but every now and again it's like, well, this is also who I am. So rather than trying to force something all the time, it's like, let me just see what happens if I go a little farther down these paths I've already gone down.
Well, it felt new, very new to me. I mean, the whole, the creature.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and kind of how, I don't want to give anything away here, but how they kind of deal with the monster and have to try to defeat the monster. I don't think I've seen anything quite like that before. It actually gets pretty gruesome at points, which is funny because it is in a lot of ways a very sweet story. This girl Doris and her grandparents. That what does she call them? They have like a
more and Morpha. And I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of those. Morpha is grandfather, and Mormor is grandma or grandmother.
Yes. But it does seem like I think you're assisted in the story a little bit by just how far away they are from the rest of civilization, and then she like lives this kind of idyllic, sweet life with grandparents who care about her, her many dogs who live in the house. But then and you get a sense that this is like folks, who are not, who are fairly recent immigrants. They probably haven't been in America for like more than 3 generations. So they very much feel like they're part of the old world. But something else from the old world has come over as well.
Yeah, it's funny, like one of the things I thought to myself when I was like, oh man, the podcast is coming up, and what am I going to say about the story? And one of the things that struck me that hadn't struck me before was I thought, man, I'm also a big fan of Isak Dinneson's work, Seven Gothic Tales and such, especially Seven Gothic Tales. And I've taught that a couple of times, and I just love her stuff. And it's there. I would like to argue, like I would like to be able to say, oh, consciously I was imitating. I wasn't consciously, but there's. If you tried to make that argument and say, no, John, I think there's some similarities here, I would have to say, yeah, kind of, and I think there was also something, Victor Laval wrote a novel called The Changeling a couple of years ago, in which the monster is a troll. I don't mean an internet, I mean like an actual troll. And he and I had a conversation about it, and I said, Victor, I wonder, like, so often in horror stories, old horror stories, the monster comes from darkest Africa or something like that, right? And I was like, were you trying to sort of flip that? And it's like, oh no, the monster comes from brightest Norway or whatever, and he said, and I definitely felt a little bit of that, that there's so much in the folklore of the place. My family's Scottish and Irish. There's so much in that folklore that is horrifying, that is weird and mysterious, that you don't have to reach that far, like to find these things that are just kind of wild and crazy, and so I think that was also a little bit of it. And Woodstock, the thing is that Woodstock, most people think about it, they associate it with the concert, right? You and 500,000 of your best friends. But that was held an hour away from the actual town of Woodstock. And Woodstock itself, until much more recently, it was, an arts colony. It was a rural little place. And the Catskills still, you can be up in, the Catskills, like the Woodstock's about half an hour from my house. And they lose power all the time during the winter, and their winter storms, just that half an hour, north and west from me, their winter storms, because they're in the mountains and what have you, man, their winter storms, they get like a couple of feet of snow, where maybe we get like, say, like 8 inches or something like that. And they're looking at between like 12 and 18 or something. So it can be a much more remote place. Which is what I kind of love about it. I kind of love the mystery of that, and of this area in general. But
and it reminds me of I guess the Dunwich Horror is probably the closest thing you know, or The Color Out of Space, actually, those two classic Lovecraft stories where it's so much about this outsider coming in and exploring this land. It's not just a guy going up against a monster. It's a guy kind of understanding getting a sense of the lay of the land and what people are normally like, but there's something very wrong happening in both of these stories. And it starts eating away at the community, terrorizing them, corrupting them in different ways. But it's, to me, the impact is there because the impact of the horror is there because you know a little bit about what the normality should be like. And I do kind of wonder if, like, you're having this older woman, Doris, looking back at her childhood, telling the story so gently and so delicately. And she does describe some horrific things and some terrifying things that happen. But she also delivers it so gently that maybe it's a way of, I guess, lowering people's defenses, kind of getting them thinking, oh, no, this isn't going to be bad. This isn't going to be bad. And then something really horrible happens. If that's maybe a tactic that you're using in delivering the story for maximum impact. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
I guess a little bit, you know, there have been a couple of times I've written stories. I remember early on, my literary agent and when I would like send her stuff to read initially, you know, and she would say to me, yeah, you know, I read that. And I was like, oh, okay. And then later at night, I was like, that's really messed up, you know, and that's great. Like
Yes.
I have tried to write more recently, you know, Brian Keene was making fun of me. I've mentioned this in a couple of podcasts, so clearly this bothers me, right?
Yeah.
That Brian Keene was making fun of me. You know, he would never write a splatterpunk story. He's too good for us, you know? So I wrote this story that was intended to be much more grim and gruesome for Dark Stars, for the John Taff anthology. And
Yes.
and it's another novella, so you know.
Yeah.
But I and it was a really unlikable protagonist, and it was, you know, like I was like, I'll splatter punk you. So
and it's gruesome. I mean, as soon as I read it,
I can't wait to read it.
It's called Enough for.
You're going to be like, that's disappointing.
It's called Enough for Hunger and Enough for Hate. And it's uncharacteristically gruesome, and I'm so proud.
Yeah. I thought I was like, I'll show you, Keene.
Does Brian read it?
I don't think he has, and I think he would probably still be like amateur, but which I wouldn't blame him. But yeah, no, I think I don't think it's as hard. Like, people are always like, you can't do a jump scare on the page, and I'm like, well, not exactly, but I think you can come close. But I probably have, like, if I thought about it, like, but not deliberately. I've never been like, this is going to be my jump scare. But I do like the idea of the thing that lingers in somebody's mind. You know, I do hope that if I mean, look, I'm not letting my kid go ice fishing after writing, you know. It's not like, no way, that ain't happening, you know. And he's 19, so like, what can I do, you know?
Yeah. And so last question that I want to ask about the story, and then Ellen, if you have any questions you want to ask or other comments. So there is no real Doris that you met at a party who told you anything like the story, right?
My lawyers have instructed me to say there is nobody like that.
Understood. Thank you. Okay, very good. Ellen, anything else that you want to mention about the story?
No, I just really like it.
Thank you.
Now, in your introduction to Screams from the Dark, Ellen, you talk about kind of the role monsters have played, or the development of the ideas of monsters, and just from a very high level, it seems like from early on, the word monster was like, I think, monere or something, or monstrum in Latin, and the idea was kind of like a warning or an instruction, like, hey, these are the parameters of the universe in which you live.
Something strange is going on here, and these things, or creatures or whatever, are slightly off.
And you quote, like, good old St. Augustine. You quote St. Augustine talking about these monsters as being kind of marvels of this created world. It made me think about, of course, the book of Job, where you've got Job saying to God, why did you let all these horrible things happen to me? And then God says, look, you really don't understand the full picture here. I mean, have you gone swimming with Leviathan, the giant sea-based monster. Have you been running around the fields with Behemoth, this giant land monster, and just kind of sets us up as kind of the parameters of, look, there's like this is a very big picture, and you don't really see it. I don't know if that helps Joe feel any better about the situation, but those two classic monsters from ancient literature show up there, and they do kind of act as sort of that warning or that instruction, a lesson there. But then you go on in the introduction to talk about how this image of the monster becomes something that is more kind of a abnormal or corruption, and then eventually leading to something that is actually morally evil. And I just wonder if you have any just thoughts about how the monster has changed, our understanding of it, our use of it in literature, how it's changed over the years.
But the thing that I did learn while writing the introduction and was thinking more about is how the women have were made monsters. Some of the monsters, a lot of women in Greek mythology were punished for things that they didn't do.
Right.
They were made monsters, some of them.
Right. So a god comes in, has his way with this woman, and that god's wife.
Yeah, the wife or the god himself punishes the woman and creates monsters out of them. And I found that really interesting.
Medusa being perhaps the most famous of those situations out of Greek mythology.
Yeah. So, and to me, that was what really stuck with me a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, monsters have changed, and from what they were originally, from the word, I mean, they became something corrupted, more immoral, amoral, disgusting. And one should have pity for them, I think, some of them. I mean, look at, Frankenstein's monster.
Yeah.
I mean, he was created by someone who was horrible. I mean, the guy who created him was not a good guy.
Right. And that in your introduction, you bring that point up, like, who's really the monster here? Is it the creature, or is it the man who created him? Yeah.
And that goes back to the Joyce Carol Oates story where, humans have done monstrous acts throughout history. And so, yeah, I mean, it's the moral decision, I think, to decide this is a monster and this is not a monster.
Yes.
What is monstrous? And action creates monstrosity in a way. I think, you become monstrous by doing something evil.
Yeah, and it seems like I don't know, and John, I'd love to have your thoughts on this as well. I just think about really how our concept of monsters has changed, in particular since the 19th century, which kind of on one end is buttressed by, Shelley's Frankenstein, and on the other by Stoker's Dracula. It seems like since then, to me, I think you've got a movement heading toward finding that which is monstrous, not an outside thing that is monstrous and represents the worst of, like, the world we live in, or the horrible parts about the human experience, but that the monsters are really in us, the Jekyll and Hyde kind of thing. But yeah, and another point that, like, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, whales are the Leviathan. They're terrifying. They're the monster figure. Not that many years ago. And now we put videos of whales swimming around with tranquil music, and they're beautiful. That image of the whale has vastly changed. No, you don't really use whales as monsters anymore. You want to protect them because they're endangered. So yeah, it just seems like the focus has shifted a lot from enormous size or carnivorous.
I mean, on mutation, or I mean, you look at carnivals and freak shows.
Yeah.
How the outside of the person, these are people, and their outsides they were judged as depraved because of what they look like. And hopefully, to some extent, that's changed.
Yeah.
And not enough, but it has changed somewhat.
Yeah. I would think the movie Freaks did a lot to change that. as questionable as it was to use actual circus sideshow freaks in a movie and let's exploit them for the movie. But in doing that, it also humanized them, I think, in a lot of ways.
I was thinking about Clive Barker. Because what I was thinking about was I was thinking about how one of the things I think has happened, like you see recently, is the monsters, the quote unquote monsters, become the good guys, and then the people who are hunting them, they're actually the bad guys, right? But then I was thinking, but then like Clive Barker's short novel CABAL, that's the most I think the most I don't know, concentrated example of that, where you've got this guy who feels that he's always been an outsider, and he goes to find Midian, the city of monsters, in Canada of all places, and he's being he's being pursued by a serial killer who's his psychiatrist, played very memorably by David Cronenberg in the film.
Perfectly.
And I've always thought that there's, I mean, in addition to that, like I've always thought that Barker's that novella or short novel is doing a lot of stuff, because I also think there's a kind of dialogue in there between sort of slasher movies versus monster movies, if you will, and the monsters win. Like the monsters are more fun than the slasher, but and so it does, like some of me, like Ellen's used the word monstrous, right? And I feel like that is, maybe that's how we define monsters, like which is just really sort of echoing what Ellen's already said, that it's about monstrousness as opposed, so like a kind of quality that you have as opposed to an appearance. You can look in, the Elephant Man, right? You can look in whatever way you look, but what you're actually, it's what you're doing, or what you are inside, as it were. But it's funny because in the 19th century, just for the sake of whatever, I mean, Frankenstein's monster, right, is a study in a way, how someone becomes, how this innocent being becomes monstrous, because is so and is driven to madness of a kind, or moral madness, by the actions of this very irresponsible person who creates him, and at the end, the monster just escapes. Like we the monster's like, I'm gonna kill myself, don't worry. But we never see that. In Dracula, one of the things that's interesting is that as the novel goes on, Van Helsing has all these kind of crackpot scientific ideas, and Van Helsing ultimately is like, Dracula himself is like a sort of slave to vampirism, and we have to save Dracula from this monstrous affliction that possesses him. So that, like, it's interesting that and I don't think this gets talked about a lot with Dracula, because it's more fun to have Dracula as, like, Frank Langella is my kind of favorite Dracula, I think, but it's more fun to have that than it is to have like this person or this being who is in fact like a vessel for this thing, this horrible affliction. And I'm not sure what that does to the monster in a way, like Frankenstein's monster. And I think you get this even in a lot of the early films. Even though he's inarticulate, he's driven to violence by these things that are done to him, right? Whereas in Dracula, there isn't really, in the novel, there is this sense of even Dracula has to get saved. But that's not something. The movies are like, no, put a stake through his heart and do it really quickly. It can be off stage or off screen. That's fine. We hear Lugosi groan. We're like, good job. I mean, I think Coppola's Dracula kind of tries to get at that in its own confused way.
Very much so. It is a kind of a moment of salvation at the end for Dracula. He's got to die to get, he's got to be killed for that.
Chop off. Your girlfriend chops off your head, and then you're good. Which, I mean, hey,
that's so religious to believe that he needs salvation.
That he's, that is that for Van Helsing, right? It's within that a very Christian framework, right? That the cross, that the host has that effect on him, and so therefore it validates the framework. And Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is just weird. I think in some ways it's my maybe my favorite of all of them.
I can't remember if I've ever read it. I mean, I know I've seen it, but I don't know.
Oh, the book is so good. It's weird. Like, it's put together weird. And part of the thing is, like, that, like, everybody's like, what's happening to Dr. Jekyll? And you just, but there's a point where the point of Jekyll is he's a massive hypocrite. He's an older man. He wants to get his freak on, and he doesn't want anybody to see him. So he's like, hey, here comes Mr. Hyde,
Yes.
And Mr. Hyde is horrifying, but like Jekyll is just afraid of getting caught. He's deeply immoral. In ways that, like, Dracula, at least you can argue is enthralled to this monstrous appetite. And Dr. Jekyll just wants to party. He just doesn't want to get
now
caught.
You're making me want to read it.
Well, and then there's this wonderful line that I've always wondered. No one's really done anything with this. Jekyll says at one point, like, I imagine in the future, like, in essence, that we'll discover that humans are actually like this kind of multiplicity of selves. He's like, for the moment, I can only release, like, it's only me and Hyde. But he's like, I imagine in the future, we're going to find out we're all kinds of different things. And I've always thought there's definitely some kind of narrative, like that there's, rather than just writing, I don't know what, cheap knockoffs, like that's actually a really interesting idea for a narrative.
Yeah, totally. Well, maybe I haven't seen it yet, but from what I understand of it, maybe Everything Everywhere All at Once kind of plays on that idea of we are so many different things, and here's this film in which Michelle Yeoh encounters all of these different versions.
I am large, I am multitudes.
Walt Whitman, right?
Yep. Hey, this is great. Robert Louis Stevenson and Walt Whitman and we're
Clive, we are nothing if not cultured.
This is so cultured. And John Langan, man, John freaking Langan.
Oh, and Ellen freaking Datlow, the queen of horror.
Datlow, yes. The empress of horror.
The empress of horror. I'm sorry. Oh my God, I just called her the queen. What is wrong with me?
No, it's the empress of horror fiction. And John, you'll always be the archbishop of horror to me.
I'll take archbishop. I would even take bishop. I don't have to be archbishop. I could just be bishop. That's fine.
It's a cush job right there.
Of a small diocese and wherever, Transylvania.
But
I say and relive.
Yes. You know that it takes a bishop to authorize an exorcism. Like a local priest can't do that. It's got to be a bishop. So
are you going to exorcise me?
No,
that is not what the Conjuring movies have. Oh no, maybe it does happen in the Conjuring movies. I'm trying to remember. I think they do sort of seek the bishop's approval.
I think that there was a specific bishop that they worked with folks in that area for those kind of cases. Anyway, let's I want to turn real quick to lightning round of questions for you. So I'd love to have both of you weigh on this. Real short questions. What was your unreasonably scary childhood monster? For me, it was the Catman monster who fought Linda Carter in the 70s Wonder Woman show. I don't know why, but that thing scared me, and I had recurring nightmares about the Catman monster. How about for you guys? What was your unreasonably scary childhood monster?
Well, it was the witch under my bed.
Yes.
I was afraid to get out of bed. I don't know how old I was, 8 years old, 7, and I was afraid to get out of bed because I was afraid the witch would get me.
Perfect. Is that, you think it's based on the Wizard of Oz, maybe?
No,
I
don't think I'd seen the Wizard of Oz at that point. I don't think so.
How about for you, John?
Well, I was going to say Frankenstein's monster, which is absolutely true. But then when you said Wonder Woman, I remembered Bigfoot from the $6 Million Man.
Oh, yes.
Holy cow, did that terrify me.
So that was apparently Andre the Giant. And I only learned that recently.
And the first and third appearances were Andre the Giant. The second appearance was someone else.
Gotcha. That guy, that Bigfoot was terrifying. If you had to encounter a monster, which one would you prefer?
I mean, and what do you mean by encounter?
You're going to have to run into them in an alley or in the woods, sit down, have dinner with them.
Are we going to, dinner, that would be different.
That's your vampire kind of monster, I suppose. I think the werewolves, now I have 3 cats. I'm pretty good at giving the under the chin scratches. So I might be able to get away with the werewolf.
Might be able to, yeah.
But werewolves would be more like dogs. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Totally.
That's man. Because I feel like, well, if you were to see, like, say, like the Loch Ness Monster, right? You would see that presumably at a distance, like close enough that you could be like, oh my God, that's an actual sort of plesiosaur thing. But far enough away that it couldn't eat you. You know, you wouldn't want to be out like those fishermen or
No.
who've gone out in boats with like big hunks of meat, and then the next morning there's no hunk of meat or any fisherman found.
Yes,
you know? No, thank you. I don't
Wow.
think I'd want to meet a monster in person. I'm sorry, I'm a wimp.
What classic monster do you think is most misunderstood or has a bad rap? Now, I'll tell you mine, and we've talked about Frankenstein some, it's fine if that's your answer, but I'll tell you mine, Polyphemus, the Cyclops, because all he's trying to do is just enjoy his, you know, the cave life with his tiny flock of sheep, and along comes Odysseus and his troop of frat boys, and they poke him in the eye. Like, that's just horrible. And then they make fun of him afterward. So I think he kind of drew the short end of the short straw there.
I like Medea. I feel bad for her,
Yeah.
Especially her background. I mean, she really was, you know, screwed up by the gods.
Yeah,
so not her fault.
But she does count as a monster. I guess she's using witchcraft, right? She's got magical powers.
Well, wait a minute. She turns people into stone. You know?
Oh, that's Medusa.
Medusa. That's Medusa.
What did I say?
Medea, who murders her own children.
No, I meant Medusa. Sorry about that.
I was like, oh my God, she killed both her kids. But
Medea's fine. No, Medea's fine. No, I'm sorry. I meant Medusa.
Yes, yes.
I felt bad for her. Well, I definitely feel bad. I can relate to Medea. I mean, she killed them to get back at her cheating husband.
Yeah.
But I meant Medusa.
Well, Medusa's a good one. John, what about you? What's your most piteous monster?
Oh man, you know, it's maybe Frankenstein's monster.
King Kong. He did nothing bad.
Oh yeah.
King Kong was great.
Yeah.
You know,
maybe King Kong. Yeah, he just wants to be left alone and fight his dinosaurs and that sort of stuff. And,
live and let live. You know,
there's a wonderful moment in the King Kong, in the original King Kong, when he's broken out, and the native peoples who guard the wall and guard the gate, a couple of them are on this kind of like, you know, wooden platform structure, and they're throwing spears at him. And I remember thinking to myself, God, here you are. This is your God. Your God has appeared, and you're trying to hurt God or kill God with your spear. There's something about that just really made a deep, deep impression.
Interesting.
But I would still go with Frankenstein, Ellen. I'm sorry.
Okay. So last thing we have is a couple of questions from the listener mailbag. Dozing Dragon asks, what's your personal take on making an inhuman monster as compelling as a human one? John, you want to take that on?
I think that there were my immediate thought, right, is there are two ways you can go with it, right? So one way is that you humanize it, you anthropomorphize it and personify it in some way, shape, or form, so that this inhuman thing seems to have motivations that we can recognize. And you're like, oh, okay, even if I don't fully understand all of it, I get it. It's protecting its territory, or I made it angry because I trespassed or something like that. And the other possibility is just that you don't. Joe Lansdale has a story. I go back and forth on how much I like it because it's about an evil dog. And I love dogs, but this guy is just being chased by this dog. For some reason, he runs afoul of this great big dog, and it just pursues him. And the whole story is just a pursuit story. And it's very frightening, and it's very well done, but it's also very simple. So part of me thinks that, or the other thing in here is that, you have, we don't know, like let's think about animals, right? We don't know why they do all the things that they do, all their behaviors. We think we do, and we hypothesize and that sort of stuff. But so I think sometimes just allowing things to do what they do, but without trying to impose any kind of external rationalization on them. The thing you got to realize, I think, is that two things. One is that your reader is, I think, going to impose potentially some kind of motivation on it. Like you may be like, no, this thing is impossible to understand. You have no idea. And your reader is going to be like, well, obviously, blah, blah, blah. And part of that, I think, is because whenever you have like a creature in proximity to a human being, there's going to be some kind of inevitable kind of mirroring that happens, or you're going to be like, well, look, this person is really nice and the monster's really not, like, oh, so it's clearly a foil. So like people we're interpreting monkeys, we can't help ourselves. We're just always trying to interpret things. So I wouldn't I almost want to say I would worry more about writing a compelling story, and then the monster will take care of itself.
Mm-hmm. Good. Ellen, G Weeps on Reddit asks if there'll be an audiobook version of Screams from the Dark.
We're not sure yet. I'm sure there will be. Actually, someone asked me that on Twitter, and I checked with my publisher. The sub-rights department, it's not an automatic thing. Macmillan won't be doing it, but they'll be trying to sell the rights to someone else. So hopefully it will be at some point.
Cool, very good. Well, one of the most important kind of audiobook experiences for me was back when I decided a few years ago to kind of check back into the contemporary horror fiction scene, was the audiobook of your best horror of the year, which is like that 10-year kind of compilation, and introduced me to so many writers who I'm follow and I'm a big fan of now, and that it was just more convenient for me to listen while I was doing.
Was it a good version? I never listened to audiobooks, and I've never listened to any of mine. I don't know. I have no idea if they're good or bad.
That one was very good.
Done well, sometimes you get complaints. It's very seldom. Every once in a while, I've had an audiobook happening, and the publishers send me the people who are reading it, and they want to know how to pronounce things.
Yeah.
And that's tough when you have 20 writers or something.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, you
Sure.
put you in touch with those writers and ask them.
Yeah.
That was kind of a weird situation. I have no idea how the book came out. It was, I think, one of the fairy tale anthologies or mythic series with Terry, because I know they asked me about Jane Yolen, and that's what she's been in. So I don't remember, so that's kind of a weird experience. Like,
yes.
I don't know.
And you have no, you don't have any input in which voice actors get chosen to do stories.
I mean, I suppose if I'm just happy they're made into audiobooks.
Yeah. Yes.
Maybe if I begged them to get someone, it's like, why would they care? I just realized, wait a minute, I just got one. The publisher did contact me, and I don't remember which book it was, but the person was supposed to be doing an English accent. They gave me examples of 2 or 3 different people doing, and I thought one was terrible.
Oh,
so
wow.
I can't even remember what book it was, but it was a recent one. It might have been When Things Get Dark.
Yeah.
And they sent me audio files of like 2 or 3 people, and I chose which I liked best.
Nice.
So, I mean, that never happened to me before.
Wow.
I'll never listen to the end, final book anyway.
Yeah. Well, so you've been doing this for 40 years, and you still are having new experiences now working in the audiobook world just a tiny bit. I love that.
Yeah, I'm kind of disappointed. Echoes was not made into an audiobook and may not, because it's so big. I mean, no.
Oh yeah. This thing's huge. That. Well, how many pages is this? This book is
longer than Screams from the Dark, which the publisher who acquired it wanted it to be huge, and I said no. Yeah, I said no. I'm not going to. Echoes didn't do well because it was too big. I am not going to do that again. He said,
let's say 800 pages. Yeah.
And there were 3 reprints. I didn't have to use the reprints, if I'd known that it would be a problem. But anyway, no, I said, no, we're not doing 200 and whatever 1,000 words. I'll do this many words, but I'm not doing that. And so.
Yeah. Well, no, Screams from the Dark it's about 500, I think maybe a little over 500 pages. It is a very rich, full volume. And I've read most of the stories, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Of course, thrilled to have a new Livia Llewellyn, new Nathan Ballingrud. We've got more John Langan in here. We've got stories from authors like, this is my first Indra Das story that I've read, and it's terrifying. Joyce,
and it's very human. I mean, it's really very human.
Yes, very much so.
I'm not even sure I don't remember if there's even a supernatural aspect of it to it.
Well, the monster here, to me, in this story is trauma. And fear, the fear that's produced because of a childhood trauma that's brought up by an encounter with a strange man, but it's not supernatural as far as we know. But yeah, and Another Laird Baron, The Return of the Black Sloth. I mean, so many great stories. So definitely, if for listeners, if you haven't gotten Screams from the Dark yet, you're going to want to get this. It's like one of my top 3 books of the year. And hey, it's I've been looking forward to this.
Half time. We're only 6 months in, but that's good.
Yes. Well, it's for me, Screams from the Dark and Dark Stars, the other anthology, and Human Monsters, Sadie Hartman's upcoming book. I'm very, there's good, strong collections of authors, and I'm very interested in all 3 of those. But I've really enjoyed Screams from the Dark. And Ellen, just kind of last question here: what do you have coming up next?
The next year's best, and I'm working on another anthology I can't talk about.
Okay, all right. When might we hear more about the next anthology?
Well, the stories aren't due till January, so not till next year.
Okay, very good. And last time we talked, you said there's one theme anthology that you would like to do that you haven't done yet, and that's the shoes. The book of shoes.
I can't even get it together to do a decent proposal, and no one's in.
I would totally write a shoe story for you, Ellen. You know that. Oh, I would. I would.
Can you help me write the proposal? I don't even know what to do with it. I mean, it wouldn't necessarily be only horror. I want it to be everything, and I want it to have some nonfiction stuff and mainstream stuff.
Well, because you've got like Old Mother Hubbard, right? No,
The little old woman who lived in the shoe.
That's right. That's it. But you have the woman who lived in the shoe, and you've got like fantastic shoes and different stories.
Sure,
like
the
fairy
red
tales.
Shoes, you have what's it called?
I mean, the ruby slippers from Wizard of Oz.
Foot binding.
That's right.
It would be a lot of fun.
That's right. Seeing the human experience through the
shoe
perspective of
whatever shod, whatever kind of foot thing you put on your feet.
Yes, that's what it would be called. Actually, the anthology would be called it would be called Shod.
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 Yeah, I like that.
It'd be called Shod, and you would have a Olivia Llewellyn story in it.
Oh, totally.
Oh,
totally.
Yeah.
Well, folks, the magic, it's happening right here as you're listening. Shod, an anthology of shoes. And John Langan, what do we have to look forward to from you coming up next?
I have a new collection of stories, my 5th collection, called CORPSEMOUTH.
Yes.
And that'll be out from Word Horde. In theory, it's already been published. I think that the ebook is available.
I've got it.
I kind of think there were some issues with like supply chain issues. So I'm not 100% sure that the print copy has come out. I know that I'm signing a bunch of book plates and doing little doodles on them and that sort of stuff if you're ordering it from Ross. So that may delay them a little bit, but you'll get a book plate with a doodle on it. So hang in there.
And that's wordhorde.com.
Word Horde Press,
Word Horde,
they're redoing my first collection. They're bringing that out, Mr. Gaunt, which will have a new story in that as well. And I'm sorry because I know there's some people who are like, damn it, Langan, now I have to buy that book. Buy the ebook. It's
When's it coming out? When's that?
Same things. They're both coming out at the same time. They have beautiful covers by Matthew Jaffe.
They're impressive.
Get me that new story. You'll have to get me that new story.
Yeah, you might like the new story. Actually, you might not. But
how long is the one in Dark Stars? How many words?
Oh, it's a novella.
Well, so is Bloodsuiger.
Yeah. Well, no, but the new story in Mr. Gaunt is like about 5,000 words.
No, but how long is the one in Dark Stars?
It's about 23,000, I think.
Oh, that's even longer.
That's it.
Well, we'll see.
And it's another Catskill story, and it also involves ice fishing. It's actually kind of weird. Anyway, it's a Wendigo story.
I like Wendigo.
About 40 pages. I don't like word count. I don't know what that means.
For one of those fundraisers, and I can't remember which one it was. Somebody the winning. I was like, hey, if you take this bid, I'll write a story for you.
Wow.
On the monster of your choice. And so the winning person was like, I want a Wendigo story. So It took me a long time. And being made, insanely angry by Brian Keene helped. But I finally did it. There was a, what do you call it? CORPSEMOUTH will have an original story in it about a banshee. And that was a request from someone who, Chris McLaren, a guy who's seen around like ReaderCon and that sort of stuff, lovely guy. And it was a KGB fundraising thing, I think, a few years ago, and he was like, I want, actually it was, and he was like, I want a Banshee story. And he had this crazy Banshee like legend that he'd found a copy of, in some old like 19th century manuscript. And the thing with the Banshee is it's a monster of class. So if you're a member of like the whatever 7 families of Ireland, then the Banshee wails for you. If you're just some poor schmuck, no Banshee. But the story is like there's this family, and the Lord is dying, and he finally dies, the Banshee's wailing away, and the butler comes in to say, my Lord is dead, and the butler's name is John Langan. So so Chris McLaren was like, this is crazy, you have to write something. So so yeah, there you go.
That is really, really cool. So, and we're looking forward to those. Yes, go out to wordhoard.com. Or look up Word Hoard, and it's HORDE Hoard, yeah, you can get both. CORPSEMOUth.
Word Hoard is E. No, Word is not.
Yeah, I think Word doesn't have the E and Hoard does.
Hoard does.
That's
I always get confused. I'm easily confused.
but yeah, the Mr. Gaunt reissue and CORPSEMOUth both out there. Yeah, and those covers are gorgeous, and like I've seen people asking around on Twitter for them to be made into posters because they put them up on the walls.
Matt Jaffe and I were kicking around this idea, and it was just sort of whimsical that at Necronomicon Providence that we would have T-shirts made up, one with Mr. Gaunt, one with CORPSEMOUth, that we would like see which sold more over the course of the,
Good idea.
Totally.
Yeah, try to and have it like a sort of a running game throughout the convention. Who has more, what have we seen? What have we seen more of?
Oh, that actually would be a lot of fun. And speaking of conventions, do either of you have convention? Are you going to be at conventions coming up?
Yeah, I'm going to be in a lot. I'm going to Planetarium in July, I think.
Okay.
Or August, I can't remember. And then WorldCon, World Fantasy Con, maybe the Westport, if it's still happening, the Westport in Sagatuck, Westport Festival, Book Festival. It's in Connecticut. And what else? I'm sure I'm missing something. I wanted to go to Necronomicon, but I just don't have the time.
Yeah.
Pretty sure. And I may be missing something else that I'm going to.
Okay,
I know. I'm going to the Merrimack thing.
In October.
It's going to take me forever to get there. But Tim Lee said he'd give me a ride. That way I can bring books to sell. Otherwise, it's like I can't carry them. It's just going to be like 3 hours or something.
Yeah.
Like it's the middle of nowhere, Merrimack Valley. But it's something.
Yeah, it's up on the New Hampshire border.
Yeah, Chris Golden organized, and it's getting bigger and bigger. So I said I'd like to if I can get.
It's just great to see the cons back and people able to, travel a little more cautiously, but a little more freely. It's great to see it. Well, again, like Ellen and John, thank you both so much for being on the show today.
Hey, thank you for having us.
Just thoroughly enjoying your contributions and the story. And Ellen, thanks for bringing us another terrific book. It's really one of the best books anyone's going to get this year. So
thank you.
All right.